business or project management perspective. I think that I'm probably running out of time. But just to conclude, we have a feature on Jogo that might be of interest to people in people who start their own communities or start their own projects called the Spaces feature. You can get in touch with us to sign up if you're interested. But what I would like to conclude with is that when we are talking of community science and innovation, or we are talking of using open science to solve problems, just like any design process, context is very important. And especially in the context of the SDGs, you cannot be going around trying to tackle the SDGs one by one. So the understanding these transitions are very important. And I truly appreciate the work of different communities around the world, and especially here in Africa, and the methodologies, the open participatory methodologies that they are coming up with to transform how we do science. But then all these communities, we all need more support. And I think that also collaboration, working together, will help overcome some of the barriers and challenges that we face. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll just stand by for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Dominic, for the presentation. That was very insightful. And if anyone has any questions, I think we have one question from Andre.
Yeah, sorry, I can ask it myself. So Gameli, thank you very much. This was quite nice. I think it's really wonderful the work you guys are doing. You talked about financing, like all of these projects and so on, right? I'm always thinking, and this might be just my wrong thinking because I'm not in Africa. Are there people trying to think about setting up companies that would basically streamline the production of this, like the output of these initiatives, right? And sell them as a service or products that then could be used to finance more projects and so on and generate local value? Or is this not in the radar?
Yeah, I think that this is a great question. Thank you very much. Yes, there are people who move on from coming up with ideas in terms of open science approaches to actually set up businesses or services that work. A good example, which is not a product of the Jogo system, is open bioeconomy, for example. You know, the work done by Jenny to actually understand that you want innovative outputs of whatever activity that you are doing. So that's a very good example for us to learn from. For one of the projects that was supported by Open COVID-19 coming out from Africa was Vote School by one of our colleagues, Obashegun, and they've been able to successfully transition from creating a solution with an open source background to actually create a service that they can sell to schools in Nigeria. And so that's actually working. So that also demonstrates that, you know, this can work. Within the Open COVID-19 program also was a project from the US, which has to do with sort of like a different face covering, which is also working. They are also working currently to transition into a business. So it shows you that it works. But how does Jogo, as a mediator or facilitator of low-cost, grassroots, early-stage prototype, really support the emergence of these enterprises or these companies will be an interesting thing to think about. And we see our role as, because the moving from idea to prototype is hardly supported, very little support. And it's nice that AfricaOSH is also supporting some of these things now. Because that space is hardly supported, we think that it's very important to do that work to support them to come to that stage, and then others can take it over. So what we are doing now in our program development, you know, especially for the new ideas that we have and that we want to develop, especially the bigger ones, is also getting partners on board who have expertise in entrepreneurship development. For example, I was having a conversation with Louis, and for example, she suggested SamBio, which is more focused on biotech, but they do a lot of entrepreneurship development in Southern Africa. So we want partners like that who have the expertise of also supporting growth from, how do you call it, from prototype to actual business and companies. So those types of partnerships will be important to help Jogo to help their projects to actually transition to companies. It's something that we've been thinking about a lot. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you for that insightful answer, Gamali. There's still room for more questions if anyone has any. You can just unmute and then ask any questions you have. So would give it a few seconds. In the absence of any questions, we'll move on to our next speaker. Okay.
Anyway, sorry for the how do you call it, continuous publicity, but I'm going to drop some links that people can check out if they are interested. We are also organizing a summit somewhere. It's going to be online, so no need to travel from wherever you are. Somewhere in July for people in the community science and innovation space who might want to like share their work or engage in some of the conversations. So you are welcome to join that and you get more information. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you to Gamali. Okay, so I'd want to add that we can all keep an eye on the chats. There are some conversations ongoing there, and then resources that are being shared in there as well. So without wasting much time, our next speaker is Dr. Jo Hapman. She's a trainer and consultant for Open Science Communications, and she's a co-founder of the Africa Archive open source portal. And so with some virtual applause, let's welcome Jo to take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here. Just trying to share my screen. Go. 1 second. Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. Here we go.
Okay, so I think Jo has to sort something at the end. Okay.
Apologies. Okay, so yeah, thanks for the kind introduction. Technology. No, it should work. And it's also a good coincidence that Gamali kicked off the presentations, because it's good to be able to build on Gamali's talk. So just to set the stage on what is it that we talk about when we mention the term open science. So there are several pillars, just to have an overview and to remind ourselves. There's a lot of there's varying definitions of the term open science, and often when it comes to scholarly publishing, the terms open access and open science tend to be used interchangeably, but open science is actually the umbrella term. We as the AfricaOSH community are very much aware of that and probably think hardware when you talk about open science primarily. AfricaORChive is more considered with open access and also open peer review and others, but just to have the overview, just verify for you. Yeah, I think you can see my slides now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So there's open educational resources, meaning freely available educational resources for research purposes and educational purposes, open access to research literature primarily, and that is essential also in our context when it comes to making research findings and results accessible to other societal stakeholders, like companies, like what Andre was asking for. Like, what is it with the scientific achievements if the knowledge is being put behind paywalls or other restrictive means? So we as AfricaORChive, we are fostering a culture for open access publishing across Africa that is also affordable. There's several challenges that African researchers face in particular that we will that we address. Yeah, so that's open access is like the most predominant aspect of open science. And there's data management or open data, and more importantly, fair data, and as open as possible, as close as necessary. Pre-registrations of research projects, open methodology. I think that's also something that's very much highly related to open hardware, open research hardware, where researchers are encouraged to share also their research equipment they use and to hopefully be in a position to have knowledge and insights into how the equipment they use operates. So how the results that are being generated through software and hardware devices and programs that come up with the results that are then being processed by the researchers. Here's where we talk about open source hardware and then also software. And the open source software community is quite established on a global scale and is working also hand in hand with the open source hardware in some consortia. Yeah, because there's a lot of parallels where it comes to open source as applied to hardware versus software. Then much work that Gamili has touched upon and has much experience with, like some of us, the citizen science, which is not the same as science literacy, which open access also is aiming to serve. But citizen science is actually to include citizens into research projects, to ask researchers to contribute in the data sharing or data collection to projects of environmental impact or some sort. And then open peer review is the quality assurance when it comes to research knowledge dissemination. That means that researchers who are knowledgeable on the research topic that's being presented in a research manuscript are to review and then assess if the methodology and the results are adequately described or if there's need for any additions or changes. And just to contextualize it to the African continent and to show you some logos that many of which you're probably familiar with. So in Africa, we actually do have quite expansive network of organizations who concern themselves with one or the other aspects of open science, like one or the other or several of the pillars of open science that we just looked at. You find Boalab with the Mamboa, who's also in the steering committee of AfricaOSH. Real Square with Obashugun, who's just mentioned, with the Volt microscope. Of course, the African Open Science Hardware Community, an organization called African Science Literacy Network, which is concerned with making research knowledge accessible to to societies in Nigeria primarily, but also across the continent. Andre is going to talk about, I guess, also about trend, the work of he's doing with Trend in Africa, also towards hardware, open hardware practices. Yeah, and then Projet Zoab is also an initiative Timon was and still is engaged in. Yeah, so there's several activities, initiatives, organizations that have emerged. The H3A Bionet, maybe some of in our audience are also members of, is for bioinformatics, international network with a regional focus on Africa. And yeah, again, like all practice one and the other open science angle. Well, so why are we talking about open science? Like, I think we can all agree, and this is also what Gameli pointed towards, is open science enables global knowledge exchange and also allows African researchers and African research practitioners and stakeholders to engage in global discussions, to not the least to have to contribute and towards the achievement of the SDGs. As AfricaOSH, we're mostly concerned with SDG 4 and 17. We are seeking international partnerships. To our motto or our philosophy is like, or the hashtags that we often refer to as stronger together. So we thrive and grow in partnership with others, to work in collaboration with various organizations that are like-minded and on the same mission with us. And yeah, and eventually as a result, through making research results from Africa accessible, we also serve all of the SDGs eventually. So depending on what research is being presented, and we help to disseminate further to make the research discoverable online. So yeah, so this is also referring back to the taxonomy within open science. There's been a European Union or European Commission funded project that ran over several years called FOSTER, which coined what open science entails, like open access, open data, what we just discussed, and then it further specifies into subcategories of open science. And for open hardware, in our work, we look at open source hardware, but also methodology related lab notebooks, and just keep in mind the breadth. So how did AfricaOSH evolve? It was at the first AfricaOSH Summit, and here was a presentation by Babashile, many of us know, and Vali is a friend and colleague. And there was a tweet that was posted during his presentation where he called for the necessity to have an African repository that contains all information and initiatives around open science from and about the continent. And proceeding to that, there have been facilitated through the Center of Open Science in the United States. There have been region-specific or discipline-specific, for the most part, communities for preprint repositories to easily disseminate research findings as preprint, free of charge for the researchers. And there were communities who were concerned with paleontology or humanities research, social sciences, and there was also one for Arabic speaking or Arabic language research output. So for a language group, there was RINARCHIVE for Indonesia, so country-specific communities. And then we thought, like, well, if now there is a call for this amongst our AfricaOSH colleagues, how about a continental approach? And this is basically how the idea was born. And then the co-founder of AfricaOSH, Justine Agnon, is also an AfricaOSH member, and I and some others who were at the first summit put our heads together and then decided, okay, let's just get started, and AfricaOSH was born. So here's the contact details. We are currently now also semi-formalized through partnership or formal partnership with the Training Center in Communication based in Kenya, which gives us a home on the continent. We want to achieve or want to basically promote the use of local African languages in science. We have a decolonized science project going on where we translate English-speaking articles into lay summaries and then translate those lay summaries into African indigenous languages to also build a language corpus of scientific terms across disciplines. It's quite an ambitious project, which we do also work on in partnership. Another goal is to not only bridge between the language barrier between Anglophone and Francophone Africa, but also Arabic, Lusophone, and the indigenous languages. And we want to highlight the relevance of indigenous and traditional knowledge in a research context, which is also backed now by the formal UNESCO recommendations for open science, which explicitly also calls for the necessity to include non-scholarly knowledge systems. Then the vision after now almost 4 years of operation is still to build an African-owned, African-hosted repository. There has been and continue to be a lot of challenges in achieving that. It's actually physically possible. It's just it's so challenging to find a partner who provides a server. We are now in conversations with a potential partner to set up that can provide server space where we can set up and run our own repository. But in the meantime, we work with established repository infrastructures for research dissemination which already serves the purpose. But so the challenges in our realm of expertise is the low visibility of African scholarly output internationally. African researchers tend to be less integrated into national research networks, which is growing and increasing in some, thanks to the international open science related initiatives, some of which we presented, saw at an earlier slide. There's restricted, highly limited access to research funding, and then the mentioned language barriers. So these are all what we address. Our current repository partners are all established either European or American repositories that are globally or internationally recognized and serve the purpose of global inclusivity for research dissemination. And they are also multilingual to some extent, and we as the AfricaOSH team for moderation of the submission are also verifying and enabling multilingual submissions. So these are the steps and also like some standards that we follow. So it's basically also how our website looks on the landing page. African researchers can submit their research manuscripts alongside the submission process to a journal article. To submit to us is free of charge. We just moderate to assure Africa relatedness, like that there's a reference to Africa, or the research presented is by African authors and co-authors. And we ensure discoverability online through establishing and ensuring the use of standards and position identifiers, like some most modern discoverability and web service tools like DOIs and ORCID IDs and Crossref, just like working with the various organizations who are involved in facilitating discoverability, not only through Google Scholar, but also other discovery systems. Not going too much into the technologies and research specifics, but after 4 years, we have now more than 500 submissions, accepted submissions in total. It's, I think by now we're above 600. We have submissions from 33 actually African countries by now, and we work with 6 repository systems to ensure diversity. We've received a couple of awards for the work that we do, thanks to international grants and networking opportunities. And we work with more than or 36 partners across different aspects of our work for capacity building, for peer review, for discoverability. So many of our partners are specified in each of our different aspects of our work. And here's just to visualize the basically from which countries we've received submissions. So it's to be regarded as a cross-continental functional platform. Here's then how it looks in one of the examples on the Open Science Framework. So where the arrow points is that through sharing preprints, researchers have the opportunity, again, free of charge, to make research output immediately discoverable, and can also apply metrics such as counting downloads and views of the articles, which informs also the research institution on how widely the research is being disseminated across the internet, and also with regional specificity. We work alongside 10 principles. I just want to point out 3 of them. So we committed ourselves and also ask our community to commit to, and this is basically the first principle is most important to us, to avoid misappropriation of African research output and knowledge that's produced on the continent by African scholars. We assign DOIs, we make the work citable, and thereby avoid misappropriation, misuse of the research output, which is unfortunately still not common practice, often also unintended, but it's happening. And then the third principle refers to multilingualism, as mentioned. And the fourth is to reinforce the necessity to incorporate indigenous and traditional knowledge in its various forms. And that's important on a global scale, in particular across Africa, not only when it comes to medicinal knowledge, which is being exploited by industrial or pharmaceutical industry partners, but also like to ensure that knowledge system can remain on the continent, and that the active components, for example, in pharmaceutical extract or in plant medicinal plants can be processed on the continent, and that value chains can be created. There's also 2 articles that I want to point towards, which you can read in depth. One was published in 2020, Developing Open Science in Africa, Barriers, Solutions, Opportunities. It was more from a top-down policy level approach, and also international consortia. And then on a national level, there was an article published by our colleague last year, Caleb Kibet and colleagues on Open Science in Kenya, to look at the situation like on various stakeholders that engage in open science on a national level, as an example, similar to what Gamili pointed out for Ghana. So the question is, like, what we do, just to link again to stop presenting here. So to link again back to why is this related to AfricaOSH? First of all, it started with AfricaOSH. Secondly, as AfricArchive, we make African research output citable. We ensure ownership remains with the African research institutions and individual researchers. And the next step, open access alone, is good, but not good enough. So now the next challenge is to work with science literacy organizations, but also with the AfricaOSH community. So how can this knowledge now be utilized also by African stakeholders across societal levels, for industry, for private companies, for NGOs, to utilize this knowledge and to build the value chains that we want to see flourish on the continent. So we're basically, I would say we're doing some of the groundwork that's necessary, and then the actors like the AfricaOSH community can tap into that knowledge, and we can help facilitate collections and make, besides being online discoverable, to create collections that are theme specific, where we can even further facilitate also knowledge creation and knowledge adoption by other stakeholders outside the scholarly community. That makes sense. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Joe, for sharing these smart insights on Africa Archive with us. Next, we'd like to take any questions, thoughts, or contributions from our attendees. You can unmute or type your questions in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, hello, Joe.
Sure, Camille.
Yeah, yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was quite interesting and exhaustive about Africa Archive. I mean, you made a point about, when we talk about open science, it's much more than open access. But then, especially in Europe and especially in the academic context, when you're talking about open science, it's almost always open access or open data. And I know that, yes, within this community, there's a bit more clarity about the entire, like what it actually means. Do you feel that maybe there might be, I don't know, more effective ways of talking about open science when we are talking of participation in a way that we can avoid some of this confusion when engaging with people?
Yeah, I think it always needs to be contextualized. I mean, as a trainer, I often have participants in a course or workshop come from different disciplines, and each of those disciplines often has a specific understanding of open science that's discipline or topic specific oftentimes. And for social sciences and humanities, hardware is often is not a big component, if any, in many research projects, so they don't even have that on their radar. But yeah, so I think it's this is where the UNESCO, I will also share the link to the UNESCO recommendation, was trying to achieve, to have a so they conducted over 2 years a global survey, and AfricaOSH was also consulted, I think, and provided insights. To find a streamlined definition, which is really hard to achieve, so they kept it super general. And open science, many also argue, is beyond academia alone, and this is, I think, where also AfricaOSH fits nicely at the intersection between industry and academia, civil society. And at the end of the day, because we keep citing the SDGs since a couple of years now, not since long, like for the longest time, open science was mostly open access, and to liberate academic knowledge, to make that usable, not only to industry partners who can afford to buy licenses, but also anyone who needs access to the knowledge, and not the least to LMICs, low and middle income countries. So long answer to a short question. I think it depends on the context, but also as a UNESCO recommendation, I have tried to come up with a streamlined definition. And I think the most important thing is to keep the discussion going, with every event, every opportunity to talk about open science principles, practices, to explore new ventures, new ideas, like untapped realms, untapped topics that are then also oftentimes probably event specific. So yeah, it's difficult to put in words, but does that satisfy at all? I don't know. But yeah, I think mostly is like for me, also open science from an academic perspective is just good scientific practice. Why do we do research in the first place? Referring to the SDGs, research is being done to accumulate knowledge, and oftentimes, not only in applied research, but oftentimes to form and improve society, like livelihood for societies, and on a global level. We have huge global challenges, which are mentioned in SDGs, but also very prominent challenges with war and conflict, with climate change, with what else? Migration. There's forced migration if it's climate change induced or conflict induced, and these can only be addressed on a global scale. And like again, this is why I'm so passionate about the work that we do with AfricaOSH. Is Africa needs to be on the table. Africa needs to be heard and be able to contribute or the experiences made, the knowledge gained. So when it comes to COVID-19, there's a lot of experience from the Ebola outbreaks in the past decades, not much of which was heard on a global scale. And now the humankind on a global scale is kind of prone to learn again how to deal with a pandemic, an epidemic, where African nations at scale have a lot of experience to share, but like not many were ready to listen and to follow. So therefore, I think it's important to get our act together. And personally, I'm also our act together in the sense of like to really talk, not only talk to each other, but also listen to each other. And this is what I personally want to achieve towards global research equity, to have all researchers around the world have equal access and equal opportunity to contribution to the knowledge accumulation that we call scholarly knowledge, and to then also make that accessible and usable for other society stakeholders. So yeah, but to come back to your question, I think the challenge is to keep discussing, contextualize what open science is and whatever event like this. Why do we talk about this? Here we have a regional context for Africa. We have a open science pillar, specific context to hardware. And then also need to look around like what other aspects of open science feed into that, and to what extent, and which individuals, which members amongst the AfricaOSH community contribute to each of the pillars, and how can we leverage our impact on society and on our communities by working together. There is tangible opportunity for collaboration. And there's plenty that I see. I think we can all identify.
Thank you, Joe. I'm sure that many of us on here who are researchers can leverage this opportunity for making our outputs discoverable immediately after we achieve them. And so on this note, I'd like us to move to our next speaker, who is in the person of Harry Afrigo. He's a research scientist at Yamachi Biotech, which is in Ghana, and he's also a co-founder of the Hive Biolab, among other roles he has in other networks. And so, Harry, please take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frida, and thank you to the entire team for having me. I'll share my screen and I would go ahead with my presentation. All right, thank you. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So as Frida introduced, I'm Harry. I formerly was at Kumasi Hive, where we co-founded the Hive Biolab, focused largely on creating a value chain around biotechnology and leveraging the pillars of open science, particularly the new paradigms around that, DIY bio and open science hardware to solve problems, both in education and research. And we've worked on some amazing projects. most especially with the Open Bioeconomy Lab, of which I think some of the speakers have spoken about, and some of the things we had done. But today, I will be speaking to the state of Africa Open Science ecosystem, most especially what we did learn before, during, and what we could learn post COVID-19. I think it's very important to start having these kind of conversations, especially around COVID-19, because it's likely that we may be seeing other forms of pandemics, if not now, but in the near future. So good to have conversations around that. So today, I mean, as part of my presentations, I want to just take us back into time, how the open science scene looked like just before COVID-19. And I want to describe in 3 words what the community or ecosystem looked like in terms of open science, maybe globally, and then speak to our context in Africa. So the 3 words I personally think resonated with the ecosystem were momentum, engagement, and community building efforts. And you can see some familiar logos over here. These, for me, are a number of initiatives that I had personally engaged with. That's where, I mean, exhibiting some of these attributes: momentum, engagement, community building efforts. And I decided to use the graph here to, depict that momentum. We were seeing a lot of engagement and momentum, and around this, we saw a lot of community building efforts. If you're talking about the Africa Open Science hardware, we had started a lot of engagement, community building through our yearly summits that we organize, or conference organized, and ever since it has been that's momentum and engagement. However, we also, what happened with a number of these communities or engagements when COVID-19 struck. But Gamali had spoken quite about a global lab and how that platform is helping to connect and use some pillars of the open science to generally connect people and helping them to springboard and solve problems. It's exactly the same we see with the Africa Science Week instituted by the Liechtenstein Forum. We also had seen works on the global level from gathering of open science hardware, and how currently they are working with regional partners like the AfricaOSH to make open science hardware ubiquitous also in the part of the continent. We also have seen, again, the Africa Makerspace Network also do quite a lot, just even before COVID started. So for me, like I said, these 3 words summarize the activities or engagements around open science within the years leading to the outbreak. But then I saw a really interesting phenomenon during the COVID, and I decided to describe this as the heartbeat, which was normal response to every human will give to any situation. We saw peak moments where we had seen a lot of people putting together projects, programs to help put this pandemic under control. We had seen just one giant lab start its program, the COVID-19 program, and we saw how the community leveraged the open science pillars to get the collective intelligence of people within the community to begin innovating around COVID-19. We had seen people develop very quick and rapid tests, leveraging other technologies that were ordinarily not easily accessible, and making them open access to other people within the community. We had seen also the Africa versus Virus Challenge, where it brought people together through hackathons to also ideate and develop solutions towards the COVID-19. Most importantly for me, because I had worked largely with the Open Bioeconomy Lab and also the RICLO network, at some point within the COVID-19 pandemic, we had seen the critical shortage of reagents and also other consumables needed for conducting and testing for the pandemic or the virus in real time. And one way to overcome the challenge was to leverage or activate certain pillars of the open science, and we had built the RICLO network to bring together and create a platform for sharing protocols to allow scientists anywhere in the world to be able to produce reagents easily accessible, most especially for research, because at the time, the virus being novel in its nature needed some level of research around it to understand how it was being transmitted within the community and all of that. So the needed tools to enable that was at some point became very limited, and countries that were in a position to make them could always were trying to safeguard what the limited supplies they had, and what that meant was a challenge for people in the global south or even in Africa, where access to these tools or even the platforms to do them didn't exist. And we saw what the Open Bioeconomy Lab was able to do through their open enzyme collection, repurpose that for the research and diagnostic collection. That's then helped to activate certain communities within the Africa and the global south to be able to produce some of these critical tools to enable research and understand more. So these were some of the things that were happening. We had seen happen as a positive response mechanism to the COVID-19 pandemic, largely happening within the open science ecosystem globally and in Africa. However, what did we see with our maker spaces and innovation spaces that were communities for enabling the critical creation of other solutions, maybe in terms of hardware and all of that? Because these communities largely served as a communal place, and the restriction that came with the pandemic saw these places close down, to some extent threatening the models that underpin how they create safe environments for learning, creating rapid prototyping of ideas and all of that. So we did not see the kind of innovation that we were expecting to see in critical time with our innovation spaces and maker spaces. I think this, again, it's more of my perspective, and it's for certain environments, this may be a different one. That is why I mentioned that I decided to use the heartbeat effect to represent that. So there were more sigmoidal and up-down situations along the way, but we did not get or generate that momentum enough to provide some of the needed solutions. So we saw a lot of programs activated from other donor organizations to ensure that they augment the critical gaps that we're facing. But then I think beyond COVID-19, we obviously have learned quite a lot about the effect of a pandemic, speaking to COVID-19, on how we practice open science in Africa. And I think that this, this realization, it's in itself a disguise, making us understand that there are a lot of opportunities and the playing ground to innovate and to hit the bull right in the eye. Also, it's also going to offer us with the opportunity to learn and grow. One other thing that I think I want to speak to is that during the COVID-19, because of the heartbeat response or effect that we had seen, which was a positive response to any human trigger, most of the time, maybe because of lack of access to high throughput resources, we're most of the time going for the low hanging fruit. But it would be a good time for us to, now that we have had people put in a lot of funds to get us to a certain level, it is time for us to prepare even more for the next pandemic, should it rear itself into our ecosystem. This is the time for us to start getting in for the high hanging fruits and then getting things right from the word go. There was a question from Andrea that spoke about how can we create a sustainable channel to seeing that some of these innovations that we are seeing currently are moving to market-ready stages where they are generally serving as product or services. I think this is the right time for us to start thinking about all of these things. And this wouldn't have happened if our doors were not knocked on by the pandemic. And I think we are going to be having more of this. I just hope to see that we leverage these opportunities to innovate, to solve the problem, and not, trying to go most of the time with the low-hanging fruits. I think, in summary, I would say that we had started well with mobilizing the Africa open science communities, tapping in also to the global open science communities and ecosystems. But then we saw some good things, but COVID-19 to some extent came to test us whether we are really in for the game, or we really only want to just bite off a fraction of what we can do. And now that we have been tested, opportunities very much abound, and this is the time for us to just take that and hit it right in the head. Thank you. I'll wait for questions.
Thank you, Harry. So if you have any questions, kindly unmute and then ask your questions or type them in the chat.
Harry, I have a question. Thanks for the presentation. I think this was quite nice. Do you think, because you said your perception was that things didn't move as fast as you expected, right, in terms of innovation and bringing these solutions to actually an usable state, if I understood that correctly? And so my question is, do you think that this was also, and I don't know if I missed this, related to issues with bureaucratic stuff? So for instance, getting, like if you build like a face mask or a face shield or even a respirator, getting this to be approved to be used in different countries in different places has a lot of paperwork, right? Was this related to that, or you didn't even reach that stage?
Attempting to answer that question, I think there was still some gaps that we needed to fill to allow the smooth transition of some of the immediate solutions that we were building, because this now gets into a point of regulatory approvals and also around good manufacturing practices. Did we have some of these things in place? Because if you want to now get some of the products or hardwares that we're building to other environments to use it, of course, it's going to face some of these regulatory obstacles. So what that meant was that we needed to ensure that our maker spaces, our innovation spaces that we're building some of these products were following good manufacturing practices, which I may be wrong, may not have been existent on largely within the community. So there was certainly some knowledge gap which was needed to be filled. So I think that was also one of the stumbling blocks and all of that to a smooth transition.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome.
We are still taking questions, so please unmute and ask any question you may have, or making contributions that have come up in the process of the presentation, and then with the input that Andrea gave as well.
I was also going to ask a question to Joe, but I felt maybe I had my turn, so I just decided to keep it up. I can ask later. Joe, the question I had was, prior to the COVID-19, what was the level of submission of scholarly articles coming in from the African continent? And then during COVID, did you see a lot of submissions, especially around COVID-19 and maybe generally having to open up conversations around whether or not people really were understanding the critical times in which we were and generally making available the knowledge commons to help overcome the challenges that we are facing at the time, in the peak period.
Yeah, great question. We were hoping we'd see a spike, really not, unfortunately, but also it's difficult to measure. So we provide the service, or we facilitate or mediate preprint submission to the partner repositories, which doesn't mean that African scholars do not utilize repositories like bioRxiv or archive.org or medRxiv for COVID-19 research. So that is increasing. I would guess, we don't have the numbers yet, but I would guess similar to the increase in preprint submissions like in Western countries on a global scale, whatever global is considered. This is also what we focus much of our work on, to assess, like we're doing investigative studies also to find ways to showcase where African scholars submit their work, where African research is being discoverable, not only through us, but also in other venues like bioRxiv. The thing is, what I personally also wasn't aware of until 1.5 years ago, approximately, is that like when African researchers work with Western researchers, unfortunately, there is a higher chance to get published in a Western journal if the affiliation is not in Africa. And that's sad, but it's true. So many African scholars hide their African affiliation. So therefore it's basically impossible to measure, to assess the real numbers of how much research is coming out of Africa, or how much contribution to research output is coming from Africa. We don't know how big that percentage is, that bias, but it's due to the peer review bias that has been also discussed in research articles, that in some editorial boards there is a bias against research coming out of the continent or from the global south in general, and that's purely racist, or maybe due to assumptions. That it's unfortunate. Similar to gender bias, that's also an issue in academia. So that's a challenge. But yeah, coming back to the question, we didn't really see a spike in submissions to AfricaOSH, but certainly there was a huge spike to bioRxiv and medRxiv because of maybe I switch off the camera. I just have a funny screen freeze. So yeah, so we try to assess that. So we can't show any numbers because of that, because it's so difficult to measure. And but we're working on that, and we also have a mapping initiative. I'll share the link to our website, so that where we showcase where African research output is being deposited in institutional repositories and international and independent independent repositories. So and each of these repositories has their own systems, which are not so easily made interoperable, if that makes sense. So the very long question, we don't know, but I guess there's been an uptake, but just not, we couldn't measure any. There's a lot of advocacy and explaining what preprints are. Like AfricaOSH has been an independent and non-institutional, or not with a legal standing organization, so people were not knowing what they commit themselves to. Hesitation to submit preprints. There's many around the world, and also in Africa, like people fear that they are not being accepted for journal publishing. So yeah, there's a lot of work that's entailed, which we didn't anticipate when we launched AfricaOSH, but we're now in the middle of it and also enjoying the ride. It's bumpy and challenging as it is, and we're also learning a lot. So but we have a steady, slow growth and uptake, and the more repository systems we work with and tap into, and the more trainings we provide, the more visibility we have as an organization, the more yeah, the more we hope the uptake will further increase. And to us, it doesn't matter if researchers. If you ask me, should I publish with bioRxiv or AfricaOSH? At the end, the result is the same. You gain better visibility for research output, which is what we want to achieve as researchers. And with AfricaOSH, it's more of a community engagement as well, because we foster open science across the continent. We facilitate collaboration across the continent for open access and open science and metric like bibliometrics. So it's basically like a career decision. Do you want to engage in open science in Africa as a philosophy, as a mission, as a vision, or are you more career driven, which is no judgment? And you need to publish with bioRxiv because they have, it's also, yeah, so it's really up to the individual. And for us, as long as we can see and measure and work also with bioRxiv and medRxiv and the others, to be able to change the paradigm. We want to prove that there's actually quite a high contribution by African scholars to the global knowledge discourse. So that's our core mission. And we just provide some means and want to make it accessible and easy for African scholars to utilize these systems. Okay, sorry for taking so much time. The answer is, I don't know. Or no for us, but probably yes. Further.
Thank you, Joe. And so we'll move on to Andre quickly. Andre is with the Neurosciences Department at the University of Sussex, and he's also the co-founder of Prometheus Science. And so thank you, Andre, for joining us today, and we'd like for you to start your session now.
Thank you. Let me just share this. I hope you can see my, I think you can see my screen now. Thank you very much for the invite to be here. Thanks for the interesting talks before and for the nice discussions. As Freda said, my name is Andre. I have a couple of different hats that I work under. My main job is to build, develop, share, and teach open source tools, mostly hardware, at the University of Sussex here in the UK. I'm originally from South America, from Brazil, and this was one of the reasons why I started down this path of open source hardware. It was basically accessibility to research equipment. And very early on, back in 2012, 13, I started collaborating with Trend in Africa, which is an NGO that brought me to do some workshops in Africa, which is what I'm going to talk about today, and they're related to open science and open hardware. I shared on the chat links to the link to this presentation, so if you want to grab links or things or whatever, you can grab from that link. And please write questions. I would love to chat and have this as a lively discussion. Yeah, so a little bit about Trend. So Trend is an NGO which is now hosted in the UK. And it's all about helping and supporting researchers in Africa or African researchers somewhere else in the world to build infrastructure and help development and try to help development in Africa by focusing on the higher education sector, right? So Trend does a lot of different projects. As you can imagine, I'm focused on the do-it-yourself, open science, open hardware part of it, but there are many, many things the Trend does. For time's sake, I won't talk to all of them, about all of them, but please do go to the website, which is trendinafrica.org. There are many participation opportunities, and one of them, which we started with the pandemic, was the online collaborations program, which if you have a project that you'd like to collaborate, that you'd like help and support, you can apply. And we're going to match you with a specialist. And if you are a specialist, so let's say you want to develop tools for researchers, you could also apply as a specialist and say, I have skills in building tools, and then we're going to match you with researchers that actually need equipment built. to try to develop long-lasting collaborations. But as I said, I've been working mostly with developing open labware workshops, which we're going to talk in a little bit. Just to give you an idea, this is a paper that came out basically showing the places where Trend has alumni, that has done courses, volunteers, has done outreach or policy projects, and so on. As you can see on the bottom left side, this is mostly on neurosciences. Then we had a lot of open hardware and a lot of courses in different topics. But basically, we are a network spread around the continent. But we're always happy to chat with more people. So by all means, if you are interested, reach out, let me know, and I can put you in contact with more people from Trend. We've done a lot of workshops. So we have like over 500 alumni for workshop courses. We've shipped more than 12 tons of equipment. And together with shipping equipment, we do actually training so that people know how to use the equipment, and this just doesn't become paperweight where they are, right? And we've been to a lot of places. We've got a lot of sponsorships from different institutions. And so Samira is the person who is the general coordinator. And so if you want to learn more information, sending her an email directly will get you most up-to-date information, but you can also send me one if you want to get in touch, and then I can put you in contact with the right people, as I mentioned, right? For the open hardware, which is the what we're here for, in the open science, back in 2015, we actually started tinkering with 3D printers, and we thought, well, this is a great tool for us to use in the lab. Back then we were in Germany, and we thought, can we actually teach and share this knowledge that we gathered, because we're all biologists, and so can we share this knowledge with other biologists about how to use 3D printers and open source tools to build their own equipment, right? Like we published this as a little paper in PLOS Biology in 2015, and we actually started doing these open labware workshops where we managed to get funds, in this case from the Volkswagen Foundation in Germany, to fly people from different countries in Africa to a third country in Africa. So in this case, the first one was in in Ethiopia. And we flew people from, I think, 7 different countries where they would learn all about 3D printing, like by building one, and all about electronics by playing with Arduino kits. And because they applied as small groups of 3 people, by the end of the workshop, they would go back home with the 3D printers and the Arduino kits in the hope that they would start a little, let's say, tinkering workshop of their own, right? And ever since, we started doing more and more of these workshops, not just in Africa, but in different places of the world. And from the learnings ever since, we did 2 types of workshops. So one of them is this basic workshop, which was what I mentioned, where we present to people what is open. So people come with 0 to no knowledge about what is open source, right? And we share with them what is our knowledge of open source and how it can be used to improve science in terms of like, how can I build my tools? How can I understand my tools better? And the whole purpose of the workshop is to share the knowledge about this. And this is something I like to say, we share with people, how do you build fishing rods? So taking from the saying of like how you teach men to fish, but in our case, because we understand, or we try to understand that in Africa and everywhere, everybody is facing different lakes and rivers, so to say, right? So different labs and different conditions. You cannot teach everybody to build a microscope because not everybody needs a microscope. So you need to teach them one step before. So how do you build the tools, or how do you learn the tools that are going to allow you to build tools, right? So how do you build fishing rods so that you know in your local situation what is the best way and what is the best equipment for you to build. So how having this ability makes you a better scientist in terms of like, I can interpret my data, I can calibrate my equipment, I can understand when something is faulty, right? And then with them, we build the tools that were needed to get the job done. So basically, in this case, 3D printer and microcontrollers and electronics kits to actually do prototypes. And so in terms of organization, the costs that we had were the 3D printers themselves, the Arduino kits, and flights, food, and the rooms to do the workshops and accommodation. We tried to keep the teaching faculty as local as possible. So the second version of this basic Open Labware workshop we did in Nigeria, in Ibadan, and out of 10 faculty, I think 7 of them were from Africa or from Ibadan itself, right? And we had a very high faculty to student ratio, so 1 to 5, 1 to 6. And then supplies, you either bring all of it, or in the case of Nigeria, you could actually buy a lot of the stuff locally, which I think is also good because then you can faster react to issues that might arise and buy things there. And here are just 2 videos of examples of people actually, this is towards the end of the workshop, where people are showing the prototypes that they built. So they had 2 weeks to learn the basics of 3D printing, the base of electronics, and build a prototype of something that they said in their application they would need in their labs, right? So here on the left side is a group from Ghana. I don't know if you can hear this, but it's not, like, this is not the most important thing, but basically it's just sharing a micro manipulator that they built and how it works. Because a lot of our point in the workshop was saying, like, documentation, documentation, documentation. So you need to write down and understand how everything works so that other people can also use this. And so here's just sharing like how it works, where they started, and so on. And it's a micro manipulator. It's a group from Ghana. And then here on the right side is a group from Nigeria, where they are actually, it's a prototype for a behavioral box where it's escape. It's called escape test for mice. And basically it's also explaining how the whole thing works. There is a little door that is controlled by a motor, and they took a big box that they had in the lab to build the box, like the container itself for the animals and so on, right? There is a link to the playlist of all the videos if you want to check that out. And so we also had to deal with local problems. So one step back, out of the 7 groups, all of them left with a prototype that was working to some extent. So there was kind of like a minimal viable product, which we hoped that they would then follow up and then bring to completion and then have a piece of equipment in the lab. But then we also faced, and then this was basically like the good and the beautiful part of this workshop, right? But then we also faced problems, as most of you are aware. There are in some places power failures that can be quite constant or quite repetitive. And so in Ibadan, we had power failures almost every day. And so the solution was to contact our funder and ask if we could divert some of the funds that we had for another thing to installing solar panels there at the university at the anatomy department. And so what happened was that we managed to divert like 2,000 euros. And in between contacting the funding agency and getting them installed, it took us 2 days. And they installed a solar system which was powerful enough to bridge the power failures for the printers for maybe like 3 or 4 hours for 2 printers working full time, which was quite nice. And this is now there as infrastructure to the university. And so this was, with this we close a little bit on what I had to share about the advanced Open Labware workshops, the basic Open Labware workshops. And we also did, as I mentioned before, an advanced version of these workshops where basically we brought in people who already had knowledge of open source and building. And then what we did was, okay, you're gonna build a tool from beginning to end, so there'll be very little lectures on this workshop. And we're just gonna have you come together for 2 weeks and basically have kind of like a hackathon for 2 weeks, right, where people are building things. And so the only thing we presented was a common definition of open source so that everybody understood exactly what everyone else was talking about. And then we shared best practices on developing open tools. And this was, again, document, document, document. You need to have everything publicly available, everything written down. It needs to be in a way that people understand and so on. And so every day we got people together by the end of the day to document things for a little while and then share their experiences, right? So basically what worked, what didn't work. And this was done in a very horizontal way, in the sense that everybody was sitting in a round table and talking about things, and not a lecture where people are just listening to things, right? And then most of the time, as I said, was building and writing the tools that they needed to do, that they needed for science, right? And so very early for this project, before we flew into the workshop location, we had to get each group to send us a bill of materials so that we could buy things and so on. And we needed also to trim and adjust the plans that they had for these 2 weeks, so that we would fit there, right? And these are just some photo impressions on how it looks like. And so you can see here on the left side, this was one of the participants sharing on the end of the day, like what worked and what didn't work, right? Like what kind of troubles they were facing, because by having then this open discussion with everybody, many solutions came from the other groups. And so together they managed to help each other out. And on the right side, this was a little bit of a smaller discussion group where one member of each group was sharing what was happening and where they wanted to take the project after the workshops ended. And I'm very happy to say that we've been tinkering with how these things work and how the workshops are giving. And I think we reached like a very sweet spot where now people have enough structure to learn some stuff, but also a lot of freedom to work on the projects enough that they are motivated to go back home and continue, and they have momentum, right? Like this energy that Harry was talking about earlier, momentum to actually engage other people and keep building things. And so what I'm sharing here are papers that are coming out from the work of these people that were alumni in the workshop. And actually, when they got back home, they actually managed to finish the prototype and finish writing a manuscript to get this published in peer-reviewed journals, right? So the first one is from a group in Ghana again, where they built this automated bots to do behavioral measurements with mice. Then this one is not a paper of the device itself, but if you read the paper, you can see that they used an Arduino and some LEDs to stimulate the systems that they needed, the rats that they needed to get the behavioral output and measure the behavioral output of the animals, and then do the biological assessment that they needed to do. And then as we are facing these troubled times, recently in 2021 or 20, I'm not even sure anymore, this other group from Nigeria actually bought a treaty. Like they were alumni from the neuroscience course, where there is a module for open source, and they actually bought a 3D printer and started using open source designs for face shields and face masks. They actually printed and built over 400 pieces of different personal protection equipment for the local hospital and the local community in Nigeria. I think this is in Ogun State, so close to the border to Benin. I think it's Benin, right? Sorry. And so basically, this is also coming out as a publication soon, I hope. And yeah, we actually wrote about the workshops themselves, so you can find a conference publication about the advanced ones and a preprint about the basic one. If you want more details, you can obviously also write me and ask things. And I'm very glad to say that we are actually now, in July, we're going to have another workshop. This is actually towards biology, but we're going to have an open source and open hardware module where we want people to apply with, like people that are actually hardware builders to apply, because we're going to match them with biologists. And together in these 2 weeks, we're going to build tools that the biologists need for their experiments as kind of a parallel track to the workshop. And so I'm going to be there. And so hopefully I'll get to meet some of you in person if you apply. And hopefully this will create more collaborations internally for people that are hardware builders and biologists to keep working together and then help each other out to solve problems and so on. So yeah, by all means, I can share the link later, but please, it's a Google form. Make sure to apply. And yeah, hope to see you there when the workshop takes place. With that, I would like to close and open for questions. Thank you very much for your time. And please do ask any questions that you might have. I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay. Thank you, Andre, for your presentation. Thank you for the other resources that you've shared and the opportunities you've shared as well. Please feel free to unmute and ask any questions you have, or type your questions in the chat and it will be read to Andre. And thank you. Thoughts and contributions are also welcome.
Right. Hello, Andy.
Hi.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a very wonderful presentation. Yes, so with open source community like this, I want to find out about, because I quickly went to your website and I realized that you work with a lot of universities as partners. Yes, do you have any plan for African Digital Innovation Hubs? Because these are institutions which are also fostering some of these hardware prototyping. For instance, a lot of DHIs, Digital Innovation Hubs in Africa have maker spaces where they foster these kinds of knowledge and try to solve African problems with open source knowledge. Do you have any plan of engaging some maker spaces or African innovation hubs in this?
Yeah, so for instance, for the workshop in Nigeria, we actually, we didn't, I mean, this is obviously our fault in not knowing. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of innovation spaces in Nigeria. One of the local partners that we had that came was a company that is selling Arduinos and 3D printers and so on. But because we do the workshop and there is only one local group, and we fly people from different universities from different countries, we never managed to engage the different innovation spaces in the different countries, right? But that's actually, I mean, I don't know why we didn't do it. It's actually a great suggestion, right? Because this would allow the researchers in the universities to actually have support for their projects after they're done. I think this was what you're trying to get at?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Yes, please. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. And would wait for a couple more minutes, and just in case someone comes up with a question or has something else to say. By the way, we were to have our last presentation by Felicia, but unfortunately she's unable to join us for this webinar. So Andre's presentation is going to be our last and final presentation for today. And so we'll give a couple more seconds or a few more minutes for questions and contributions. And as we wait, okay, as we wait, would like to mention that the first three speakers we had for the webinar are people who have already been instrumental to AfricaOSH since its inception. And so Johanna and Harry and then Gameli are people who have been helping the community to expand and then have brought their ideas on board to help the community reach where it has gotten to right now. Today we had a new voice in the person of Andre, who added great insights to our conversations that we started having from 2018. In the absence of any other questions, I think we can wrap up with the webinar. And I'd like to share my screen with some of the activities we have in line for the rest of the year, just so we can understand some of the things that AfricaOSH is planning and how we can all collaborate to ensure that we're able to achieve our goal. And so if you can see my screen, we'll be having our second webinar in partnership with Gathering for Open Science Hardware, which is a global community of open science hardware enthusiasts all over the world. And AfricaOSH happens to be a partnering network of that bigger network. And so that will be happening next month in May. And details concerning that would be shared in due time. And then to our next slide, it's possible to join the community so that you can have access to the speakers, have access to the opportunities and funding for any project that you may have in mind. And so our AfricaOSH website has been relaunched, and you can access the link on that website to join our community. We also have several social media communications that provide the link as well for joining the community. And so I encourage us all to join the community so that we can grow and then collaborate more on open science hardware projects. Our main event or our main activity that AfricaOSH tries to engage its community and also to reach more people to join the communities through our summits. And for this year, we'll be having our summit in Mboa Lab. It's open to all community members and other people who are interested. Our first and second summits happened in Ghana in 2018 and then in Tanzania in 2019. And then due to the COVID-19 and its traces in 2021, we couldn't hold the summits in these years. But for 2022, we are coming back, and then we are hosting our summit in collaboration with Mboa Lab in Cameroon. And so due dates and then application details would also be shared when it's ready. And so once again, I'd like to give special thanks to our speakers for giving us their time and also coming to join us here and sharing their insights from their various organizations and from their reflections, and then sharing the perspectives of growing the open science hardware community in Africa. And we are very grateful for that. And we also thank everyone who was able to make it to this webinar and for participating and for asking questions and making contributions as well. On this note, if we could all turn on our videos for a group photo, if you can, it will be helpful for us, just so that when we meet at the summit, we can still continue the conversation since we would be familiar with ourselves. Hi. I'll be taking the photo. And hi, nice to meet you all. Nice to meet you all.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Thomas. Is that Thomas?
Was that great?
I joined a bit late. I hope I look forward to see the recording.
Yeah, the recording will be shared later on after the webinar. Yeah. Okay, so thank you all for joining the webinar, and until our next webinar, bye for now. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye, 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 bye.
I have no electricity here. Somewhere in Georgia.
Sorry, Mark.
Only lighter. Bye.